Let's Google some art. This is the first episode. I'm taking this completely off the cuff. And as you can see, I literally Googled art. And it's weird, interesting, huh? First thing that comes up, Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. Look at that. You Google the word art and Starry Night comes up. And there's another Van Gogh. We're going to skip what we don't want to see. Cypresses in Wheatfield, I'll title that, also Van Gogh. Monk's The Scream, Mona Lisa. And then not much else. Look at that. Hookah size wave. And probably the more we go on, the more we won't want to see. Girl with the Pearl Earring, Vermeer. What do we want to follow today? Look at that. Andy Warhol comes up fairly quickly. Marilyn Monroe. Prince, silkscreens, Klimt. More Warhol. Jeez. Michelangelo. So there's some hope for this world. Roy Lichtenstein. Let's go back. So let's take a journey with Van Gogh. Why not? Late Impressionist, or one could say Post-Impressionist. Starry Night painting. Van Gogh only painted for 2 years, which is the extent of his career as we know it as an artist, and produced thousands of work, multiple paintings and drawings a day. And he actually didn't like this painting. Did anyone know that? Because it's composed and artificial, and he did it, he planned it out, and then came back and felt that it was kind of silly to be so particularly imaginative to try to create something so false. But Van Gogh stretched himself in response to other artists such as Gauguin, who was all about composing and designing works that weren't exactly just taken from life. We want to learn about Van Gogh. So 1878 to 1880 were his dates. His 1880 is when he met his demise, probably close to the end of his natural life anyway. It was not suicide as we know nowadays, except for some sticklers who challenge the evidence. But there's more evidence. Oh, look at this. We'll talk about this one. But there's more evidence that the idea of him committing suicide was always the false story, and that is well known that he was accidentally shot in the stomach, expected angle of entry, and all other characteristics that would have come from horsing around with teenagers in the town of Auvers-sur-Severe. Sorry, French viewers can correct me on that pronunciation. Sorry. Northwest of Paris, so that is the town I'm looking for. Upper class youths that he was horsing around with. One who had an obsession in France with America, late 1880s, with American reality at the time, not in movies, of westward expansion in the Old West, to the extent that he was wearing leather-fringed suits and carrying a horrible, malfunctioning excuse for a pistol, as if he was a cowboy, which was known to misfire at times, and did in Van Gogh's direction. I'll leave the rest to you. Nothing new here. Self-portrait, not often seen. That's the self-portrait that was authenticated not too many years ago in the possession of the Wadsworth Athenaeum Museum in Hartford, Connecticut, who owned this Van Gogh for quite a few years without it being authenticated. And they now have 2 authenticated Van Goghs. And you can see it's really an accurate portrait in progress, great intensity, and diving right into his differentiated brushstrokes, imaginative kind of color usage. Not in the fully refined, resolved kind of portrait that we would usually see of him, by him, such as we might see in an image like this. Come on, resolution. Hello. What's the word I'm looking for? Divisionist color. For you. He did indeed cut off his ear, the majority amount of it. I always make sure to ask my students, do you know who Van Gogh is? Because he may, in these days, he may be one of the most famous artist names that we know in general, and yet a lot of people don't know artist names, or if they've heard of Van Gogh, they don't really know anything else about him. And I think that goes along with the idea that not a lot of people know what art is, so to speak, other than something people do, and that it exists as a field and a study and as a pillar of culture and society itself. But that's a mystery to them. Perhaps they've heard that Van Gogh cut off his ear, perhaps that he committed suicide, even though he didn't, but that he was a late impressionist and steered, consciously or unconsciously, joie de vivre, the very French slice of daily life kind of genre approach of the Impressionists. And Van Gogh is Dutch, steered almost single-handedly the light-hearted, joyous, exciting nature of Impressionism into what we could really most descriptively call kind of an Eastern European Romanticism, which means that Van Gogh wanted to express himself from a place of emotion, meaning that he found emotion in the world. He found stories wherever he looked. He held a view that the world perhaps had a soul of its own, analogous to the artist's soul, and that's what was worth exploring, creating, depicting, expressing in a modern way, like the Impressionists, but far from their scientific or analytical interests, political interests, social interests, even cosmic. We can go back to this elevated view of the world, nature, and the universe. Poetry. I gotta organize my tabs better next time. Poetry. Different Starry Night, actually taken from nature. And I don't think this is the whole image. I think it got cropped at the bottom here. I think there's supposed to be people here. Go back. Yeah. You can see the whole image here. A conscious effort to elicit poetry in nature a little differently than the Starry Night. And if I bring up Van Gogh poetry, I'm going to bring up poet, and we'll find his friend Eugene Bach, who was a poet, and we see the stars behind him. This cosmic view. The Impressionists didn't have a cosmic view of art or painting. The intent was actually quite the opposite. They rebelled against the kind of spiritual or religious, mythical art that came before them. So maybe we'll do another search specifically, and maybe I'll plan it a little better on Impressionists themselves. I do have more more words and targeted images that I can bring to bear on that conversation about actually what was a little ephemeral and mysterious and exciting about the Impressionists themselves. But it certainly wasn't in the elevated, mystical, philosophical way that Van Gogh approached art. Starry Night, Don McLean, Google it. I can bring up my Van Gogh files from my art reference library. Night Cafe, kind of a sinister, foreboding kind of place. Cypress trees, moon and sun. Wonderful Van Gogh drawing. Just blows me away to see something like this. So amazing. Such an amazing drawing. Pass that one by. Yellow sky. Houses. Yellow sky. Self-portrait. Self-portrait. Potato eaters. Early Van Gogh. Scene painting. Divisionist color. There you go. Hard to argue with that. Really nice, tight knit. I do teach quite extensively on how Van Gogh arrives at something like this and controls his colors and what he's actually doing in a very technical way. Beautiful, unusual kind of a self-portrait, probably fairly early in his painting career, with the formality of the suit and traditional formal pose, but with the distortion and complete divisionist color and expansive range over the full spectrum. And yet, it's not the most attractive image in the world because of that distortion. I think ultimately it's not just divisionist color, but it's a creative use of textures and different kinds of brushstrokes, not fully arrived at the kinds of patterns and measured regular brushstrokes that he would have used eventually as a consistent standard lens through which he viewed the world. Meaning, we could look at this and think of it as a number of different kinds of lenses pastiched into one painting. Let's get back to that. Peach trees in the spring, probably. And that would be outside Arles. Most of the paintings that we've seen here would be outside Arles. That's where he spent the majority of his career. He was in Auvers only for a few months, I believe, at the very end of his life, after he started to become notable, and his brother Theo moved him up to Paris, and then that didn't work, living together just outside of Paris to Auvers, because Van Gogh was a rising star, and people were curious about him and scandalized as word was getting out that he was previously living in the asylum at Saint Remy, trying to treat, control, live somehow with his epilepsy. Quite a story about Van Gogh that his life represents. Way too much to get into in a short flick like this. Stories about this. Oof, come back. That just looks beautiful on the screen. Look at the texture. There's that drawing of sun and clouds over wheat field, and alongside with the Starry Night. Drawing of the Starry Night before he actually painted it. Actual photograph of Van Gogh. So I think that's it. Sort of how I envision the show going. I'll edit this, and who knows what other kind of stuff I'll throw in there. Oh, proof that he cut off his ear. You can buy his ear. But this was pretty good. I enjoyed it. Got a little excited. Inspired some thoughts, and hope it did for you too. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you another time. Gary Jacobs, Gxxgling Art.